NATO support transforms three simultaneous sectors of the Ukraine-Russia front, and a defensive line that was cracking under coordinated Russian pressure stabilizes, then advances on all three axes within 14 days. Thursday, 2 at 11 a.m., a NATO joint coordination cell embedded at an undisclosed location in western Ukraine, not a command post, not a headquarters, a cell, 12 people, 5 nationalities, 3 working languages, 4 secure communications terminals, and 1 shared operational picture updated every 4 minutes by a fusion of satellite, drone, signals, and human intelligence collection that no single national intelligence service could sustain independently. The cell's mission was not to command Ukrainian forces. It was to ensure that the support flowing from 32 alliance member states arrived at the right place, at the right time, in the right combination, to address the specific operational requirements that Ukrainian commanders had identified and submitted through the NATO-Ukraine Military Coordination Framework established 22 months earlier. On the night of Thursday, February, a night that Ukrainian commanders had flagged in their daily situation report as potentially the most pressured moment of the preceding 4 months, the cell was running 3 simultaneous coordination threads, each tracking a different crisis on a different axis of a front that stretched 100 kilometers. Thread 1. The Kharkiv sector, where a Russian mechanized push had gained 11 kilometers in 4 days against a Ukrainian defensive line that had been in continuous contact for 16 weeks and was running at 44% ammunition availability. Thread 2. The Zaporizhzhia axis, where Russian engineering units had spent 3 weeks constructing a secondary obstacle belt 6 kilometers behind the first defensive line. An obstacle system designed specifically to stop Ukrainian exploitation forces from converting a tactical breach into an operational breakthrough. Thread 3, the Kherson Bridgehead, where Ukrainian forces holding positions on the east bank of the Dnipro River were under sustained Russian artillery pressure from 3 directions simultaneously. Their supply line across the river increasingly interdicted by Russian drone and artillery targeting that had destroyed 2 crossing points in the preceding 72 hours. 3 crises, 3 different capability requirements, 1 coordination cell running all 3 simultaneously at 2:11 a.m. What made the coordination cell's work operationally decisive, rather than merely administratively useful, was the nature of the support it was tracking. Not generic weapons deliveries, not a resupply schedule organized around production availability in contributing nations. A specifically sequenced capability package that had been built against Ukrainian General Staff operational requirements submitted 9 weeks earlier, when the intelligence picture had begun suggesting that Russian forces in all 3 sectors were building toward a coordinated multi-axis pressure campaign. 9 weeks of lead time, 3 simultaneous crises developing exactly as assessed. The support pipeline had been loaded in sequence 9 weeks before it was needed. It began arriving 48 hours before the crises peaked. What's your assessment? Type A if you believe the advanced intelligence assessment, 9 weeks before the crises peaked, was the irreplaceable element that allowed the support pipeline to arrive in time. Type C if you believe the multi-axis coordination capability itself, tracking 3 simultaneous crises with differentiated support requirements, was the NATO contribution that no single national effort could have replicated. Drop your full tactical analysis in the comments. The Kharkiv crisis was an ammunition problem with a command dimension. The 16-week contact rotation that had degraded the defending Ukrainian brigade to 44% ammunition availability had also degraded its human capital. Company commanders who had been in continuous contact since the previous October, operating on 4-hour sleep rotations, making targeting decisions under cognitive loads that had been above sustainable levels for 11 weeks. The Russian mechanized push had not succeeded because Russian tactics were superior. It had succeeded because it was timed to a window of Ukrainian exhaustion that Russian intelligence had correctly identified through analysis of Ukrainian radio communication patterns. The frequency of error corrections, the increasing latency in fire mission response times, the reduction in proactive UAV tasking that characterizes units whose commanders are operating below optimal capacity. Russia had found the exhaustion window and pushed into it. Subscribe and hit the bell. This is the level of operational analysis you get here every week. The NATO support response addressed both dimensions simultaneously. Ammunition, 38,150mm rounds, including 4,200 Excalibur GPS-guided projectiles, arriving in a 12-hour convoy window beginning the night before the assessment flagged the sector as critical. And a rotation injection, the accelerated deployment of a reserve Ukrainian brigade that had completed a NATO training cycle in Poland 6 weeks earlier and had been held at 72 hours' notice to move specifically for this contingency. The reserve brigade began moving toward Kharkiv at 3 a.m. On the same Thursday morning, the coordination cell was running its 3 threads. It would reach its assembly area in 31 hours. The defending brigade could hold for 31 hours with 38,000 additional rounds, and the knowledge that relief was coming. The math worked narrowly. The Zaporizhzhia obstacle belt problem required a different capability entirely. Not ammunition, not manpower, but engineering intelligence and the specific weapons to act on it. The Russians' secondary obstacle system was not a conventional minefield. It was a combination of anti-tank ditches, concrete dragon's teeth in place by Russian engineering units operating under cover of darkness over 3 weeks, and a secondary minefield belt positioned between the obstacles and the prepared firing positions behind them. The exact layout had been characterized by a combination of synthetic aperture radar imagery, which can detect subsurface density changes indicating buried obstacles, and low-altitude drone reconnaissance conducted by Ukrainian UAV crews operating at night with thermal imaging. The characterization was precise. 4.2 kilometers of obstacle belt, 8 specific crossing points that Russian engineers had left as their own future access routes, and a minefield density map accurate to approximately 15 meters. The NATO support for the Zaporizhzhia obstacle problem came in 2 forms. The first, a consignment of M136 Volcano scatterable mine systems, not for offensive mining, but for the specific tactical technique of using remote-delivered mines to seal the Russian engineers' own crossing points at the moment a Ukrainian breach began, preventing Russian reserve forces from using those crossing points for a rapid counterattack through gaps the Ukrainian engineers had just opened. The second, a targeting package built against the obstacle belt's specific layout. 41 grid references for the buried obstacle concentrations, the crossing point locations, and the firing positions behind the belt, with recommended weapon-to-target matching that the Ukrainian engineering and fire support commanders had requested and that NATO targeting specialists had compiled from the imagery analysis over 48 hours. The package arrived 24 hours before the planned Ukrainian breach attempt. Ukrainian commanders had 1 full day to integrate the targeting datum into their operational plan before execution. The breach, conducted on day 6 of the 14-day recovery period, cleared all 8 Russian crossing points in 94 minutes using Miklik mine-clearing systems on the minefields and M58 Miklik on the Dragon's Teeth obstacle belt. The Volcano mines sealed the crossing points behind the Ukrainian breach force 17 minutes after the last lane was cleared. Russian reserves attempting to use their own crossing points to cut off the Ukrainian exploitation force found every entry point blocked. They had to detour 11 kilometers to the nearest unblocked approach route. 11 kilometers at the speed of a Russian BTR column under drone harassment is 47 minutes. The Ukrainian exploitation force had 47 minutes to consolidate its position before the first Russian counterattack elements arrived. It was enough. The position held. The Kherson Bridgehead crisis was the most complex of the 3 because it involved not only weapons delivery, but physical infrastructure. Specifically, the restoration of a crossing capability that Russian fires had been systematically degrading for 72 hours. 2 pontoon bridges destroyed, 1 remaining bridge operating at reduced capacity with Ukrainian engineers repairing battle damage continuously. The resupply rate that the bridgehead needed to sustain combat operations was 340 metric tons per day. The single functioning bridge was passing 110 metric tons per day between repair windows. The bridgehead was consuming its reserves. At the existing resupply rate, ammunition and fuel would reach critical levels in 68 hours. What would you have ordered as the Ukrainian Kherson sector commander at 2:11 a.m.? With 2 bridges destroyed, one operating at 32% capacity, Russian artillery targeting every crossing attempt, and 68 hours before the bridgehead's combat sustainability collapses? Withdraw the bridgehead force before the window closes? Hold and accept the resupply deficit, betting on a Russian operational pause? Or accept casualties at the crossing point to force maximum throughput before the remaining bridges also hit? Leave your decision in the comments. The NATO support for Kherson was not a weapons delivery. It was an engineering solution. Through the coordination cell, 2 NATO member states contributed specialized river crossing equipment that Ukrainian forces had previously requested but not received. 8 M3 amphibious rigs, self-propelled pontoon sections used by the German and British armies for rapid river crossing, capable of linking together to form a drive-on, drive-off ferry capable of passing 45 tons in a single crossing and operating continuously at a rate of 1 crossing every 12 minutes under fire conditions. The M3 rigs arrived at the Kherson crossing area at 4:17 a.m. on Saturday, 49 hours after the coordination cell flagged the bridgehead sustainability crisis. Ukrainian engineers, who had trained on M3 operations in Germany 8 months earlier, assembled the ferry link in 38 minutes. The first M3 crossing, carrying resupply materials, departed the West Bank at 5:06 a.m. By 6:01 p.m. on Saturday, the bridgehead was receiving 290 metric tons per day across the M3 ferry. Not the full 340 required, but enough to halt the consumption of reserves and stabilize the bridgehead's 68-hour clock indefinitely. Russian artillery targeted the M3 ferry operation from the first crossing. Ukrainian air defense, specifically 2 additional Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun systems that had arrived in the same convoy as the M3 rigs, provided point defense against the Russian Lancet loitering munitions that had destroyed the 2 previous bridges. The Gepard's twin 35mm cannons, firing at rates of up to 100 rounds per minute per barrel, generated a fragmentation zone over the crossing area that Lancet munitions, subsonic, flying at fixed approach angles, could not penetrate reliably. 3 Lancet strikes were attempted against the M3 ferry in the first 48 hours of operation. All 3 were engaged by Gepard. 1 was destroyed at 340 meters. 2 detonated at altitudes above the effective damage threshold for the ferry equipment. The crossing continued. The 14-day recovery period produced outcomes that no individual support element could have generated independently. In Kharkiv, the reserve brigade's arrival and the ammunition resupply halted the Russian 11-kilometer advance on day 4 and produced a 3-kilometer recovery counterattack on day 9. Not a dramatic breakthrough, but the recapture of 2 villages and a terrain feature that had provided Russian observation over Ukrainian defensive positions. In Zaporizhzhia, the obstacle belt breach and the Volcano sealed counterattack routes produced a 6-kilometer exploitation advance that outflanked a Russian defensive position that had held for 7 weeks and forced a Russian withdrawal to a new line 4 kilometers east. In Kherson, the M3 ferry sustained the bridgehead through the Russian artillery campaign and provided the logistics foundation for a Ukrainian offensive action on day 12 that pushed the Russian observation posts targeting the crossing area back 2.8 kilometers, enough to reduce effective Russian targeting of the M3 operation from observed direct fire to unobserved indirect fire, dropping bridge strike accuracy by 67%. 3 sectors, 3 different crises, 3 different capability requirements, 14 days. The aggregate territorial change was modest. 11 kilometers of ground recovered in Kharkiv, 6 kilometers advanced in Zaporizhzhia, 2.8 kilometers pushed in Kherson. But the strategic significance was not in the numbers. It was in what had not happened. The Kharkiv line had not broken. The Zaporizhzhia exploitation opportunity had not been blocked by the obstacle belt. The Kherson bridgehead had not been evacuated. 3 potential losses had been converted into 3 measured recoveries. The front had not collapsed on any axis, and Russia's coordinated multi-axis pressure campaign, timed to a Ukrainian exhaustion window that was real and correctly assessed, had produced nothing it was designed to produce. That outcome, 3 potential defeats converted into 3 modest advances, does not appear on a map as a dramatic shift. It appears as a front that held, then moved slightly in the right direction. What it represents operationally is the defeat of a Russian strategic concept that simultaneous pressure on multiple axes would stretch NATO support capacity beyond its ability to respond coherently to all three simultaneously. The concept was not wrong in principle. It was wrong about the coordination cell's ability to run three threads at once, the supply pipeline's ability to deliver differentiated capability packages to three separate operational requirements in parallel, and the Ukrainian military's ability to absorb and employ three different support packages simultaneously on three different axes. NATO support changed the battlefield in those 14 days not by providing a decisive weapon on any single axis. It changed the battlefield by providing the right weapon on each axis at the right time. Ammunition and rotation in Kharkiv, engineering intelligence and Volcano mines in Zaporizhzhia, M3 rigs and Gepard air defense in Kherson. The support was not generic. It was tailored to three specific operational problems, identified 9 weeks before they peaked, and delivered 48 hours before they became unmanageable. That tailoring, the ability to characterize a specific operational gap and fill it with a specific capability rather than sending whatever is available, is the qualitative dimension of NATO support that production figures and delivery tonnage do not capture. Production figures count what was sent. Operational outcomes reflect what was needed. The difference between those two things is a coordination cell running three threads at 2:11 a.m. and a 9-week lead time on a support pipeline built against an intelligence assessment that proved correct. The front held, the three axes held, the 14 days produced three modest advances on a map that had been trending in the wrong direction. NATO support did not win the war in 14 days. It prevented the war from being lost in them. That is what support does. That is what it did. The Russian coordinated pressure campaign had been built on a correct intelligence assessment of Ukrainian exhaustion and resource depletion. It found the window, it pushed into it. The support pipeline closed the window before the push could break through. The next Russian assessment will identify the next window. The coordination cell will be running three threads when it opens. The supply pipeline will have the next 9-week lead time loaded. That is the operational reality of a conflict sustained by alliance. Not a single decisive battle, but a continuous competition between Russian operational creativity and NATO support responsiveness. Resolved at 2:11 a.m. by 12 people in 5 languages around 4 secure terminals. The front moved 3 places in the right direction. The map barely shows it. The 14 days that produced it were the entire war in miniature. Exhaustion, pressure, support, stabilization, recovery. Repeated until one side's capacity for the repetition runs out. NATO support did not determine which side that will be. It extended the competition. It kept Ukraine in it. It closed 3 windows in 14 days. That is what it did. That is enough. Was the 9-week advance intelligence assessment correctly predicting a coordinated multi-axis Russian pressure campaign the foundational achievement that made the entire 14-day response possible? Or would the coordination cell's real-time responsiveness have been sufficient to manage the crises even with shorter warning? Does the tailored support model, specific capabilities matched to specific operational gaps, represent a fundamentally more efficient use of alliance resources than conventional resupply by volume? Or does it create a fragility risk when the intelligence assessment is wrong about which capability is needed? And what does the M3 river crossing solution in Kherson, an engineering answer to an artillery interdiction problem, tell us about the gap between weapons-focused support strategies and the operational realities of sustained combat in complex terrain? Like the video if this breakdown delivered the analysis you came for. Subscribe, hit the bell, and leave your read on the 14-day 3-axis stabilization in the comments. The next deep dive is already in production. There is a detail from the Kharkiv sector recovery that every commander who has run a unit in 16 weeks of continuous contact will recognize. When the reserve brigade arrived at its assembly area, the brigade commander walked the defending brigade's forward positions before his own units occupied them. What he found: trenches repaired 17 times, firing positions reconfigured around battle damage, ammunition rationed by individual round, was not a unit at the edge of failure. It was a unit that had made failure impossible through 10,000 small adaptations over 16 weeks. The resupply and rotation were necessary. They were not what had held the line. What held the line was in the earth, in evidence of a unit that had refused, through 16 weeks and 11 kilometers of Russian pressure at 44% ammunition availability, to accept that the line could move. NATO support restored the conditions for continued resistance. The soldiers had been providing the resistance without it for 16 weeks before it arrived. That distinction is the most important one in any analysis of what NATO support changes and what it does not. It changes the arithmetic. It does not provide the will. The will was already there, in the trenches, repaired for the 17th time. The coordination cell at 2:11 a.m. was tracking 3 threads. The reserve brigade commander, walking the Kharkiv perimeter 31 hours later, was reading the 17th repair on a trench held without adequate ammunition by soldiers who had not been told it was allowable to stop holding it. NATO support changed the arithmetic of what those soldiers faced. The soldiers had already decided the arithmetic was irrelevant. Both things are true. Both things matter. The front held because they are both true simultaneously. The support met the will at the assembly area. Together, they produced 14 days, 3 modest advances, in a competition that kept running. That is the full accounting. Not everything. Not the most important thing. But the arithmetic. And in a war of this duration and intensity, arithmetic determines whether the will already present has the tools to do what it has already decided to do.